Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Many Faces of Cancer podcast. I am your host, Melissa Grosboll, and joining me today is Andy Campbell. And Andy is a resilient survivor and an inspirational author who's overcome numerous life-altering challenges, a victim of childhood sexual abuse and bullying, the loss of his mother at an early age, and the eventual estrangement from his father, his battle with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, and the loss of his youngest son to suicide. Despite enduring multiple surgeries, grueling chemotherapy treatments, and the tragic loss of his youngest child, he has demonstrated remarkable strength and perseverance and developed a deep understanding of resilience and knows firsthand what it takes to overcome monumental challenges. To share with others what he has learned through his experiences, Andy has written the book, Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks, 15 Breakthrough Core Beliefs to Transform Challenges into Opportunities. And Andy lives with his wife and remains actively engaged in the lives of his 3 remaining adult children as he continues to support his family while managing his own health challenges. So welcome to the show, Andy.
Thank you, Melissa. It's great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
I am so glad to have you on. And now, where do you hail from? Where do you live?
You probably can't tell by the accent, but I am from the southeastern United States. I live in Charleston, South Carolina.
Oh, I love Charleston.
Just a little bit outside of Charleston, but in Charleston.
We lived in Atlanta for 5 years when I was going to school, and that was a every couple of month weekend trip. We would head out to Charleston for long weekends. Absolutely beautiful out there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is actually, and you should be like everyone else. It seems that's moving to Charleston. There seems to be, it's growing just amazingly. So, don't be a stranger.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to move there. I don't know if I want to move there permanently, but it is a great place to visit.
Yeah.
I kind of like the mountains here in Colorado.
Yeah.
But I do miss the ocean. I grew up in Florida, and I do.
Oh, okay.
I do miss the water, so we try and get back there as often as we can.
My youngest daughter lives out west, works for a company in Nevada, and that's a place that she really likes is Colorado. She's I think she's kind of fallen in love with Colorado, so I understand.
It's a pretty cool place to live.
Yeah, it is.
All right, Andy. Well, we have a lot to unpack here today. You have quite the story and quite the life that you have gone through. So, because this is a cancer podcast, I want to kind of start with your pancreatic cancer. So, can you kind of take us back to what was going on in your life? Like, when were you diagnosed? How were you diagnosed? Kind of that whole aspect. I think it was 2018.
Yeah. August of 2018, I'm coming up on 7 years since diagnosis. I had been having some abdominal pain. Turns out the abdominal pain had nothing to do with the cancer. I was really fortunate that I think it turned out to be something like IBS. I got treated for that. And but my wife finally told me, we'll touch on it later, but my mother and 3 of her sisters had died from breast cancer, all in their 50s. I think one made it to 60, but 3 of the 5 sisters died by the time they had basically in their 50s. And my mother died at 53. She was 42 when she was first diagnosed. So I just had it in my mind. Don't know why, but I was certain I was going to die before I ended my 53rd year. Like, my 53rd year would be the last one. It would probably be cancer. So I'd been checked regularly since my 40s. 42, actually, I started. That was the age my mother got diagnosed. So at 42, I started getting checked for, primarily prostate cancer, blood work, that kind of stuff regularly. I was just convinced it was going to show up. And, I was certainly fearful that it would show up. And so at 53, I had this abdominal pain. And my wife, convinced me to go in to see our general practitioner, who's a great physician. He really is just a wonderful human being and a great physician. And I think they thought I had maybe a gallbladder issue, because he gave me some medicine. And the way I responded to it, the abdominal pain, he sent me for an ultrasound for my gallbladder. And I could see on the tech's face something wasn't right, but of course they won't say anything to you.
Right.
And it was that afternoon that the office called me and told me that they had found lesions on my liver, and I needed to get an MRI the next day. And I messaged my physician and I said, "Look, liver cancer is bad. I get it. Liver cancer is bad, but at least it's not pancreatic cancer." And the next day they told me I had pancreatic cancer and it was stage 4, and then the process starts, right? And after I regained my composure from turning into a puddle from the diagnosis, I was not a stoic at that time, and I did not act stoically. He said, "Look, don't cancel. I mean, don't make like your final vacation plans, and don't quit your job. I think you have this mutation. I think that's what your mother and her sisters had. And so we're going to get you tested for that. And if that's the case, some evidence is out that some of the chemotherapies might have a better, success rate. And so, just don't quit yet. First objective, let's get you to 6 months. Then we'll get you to a year. Then we'll get you to 3 years, and so on. So let's just take it 6 months at a time." And that's what we did. And so then began the journey.
Once upon a time, like pancreatic cancer, like that was it. Yeah, make your final arrangements because that's it. And yeah, they've made a lot of great strides with that in the last 20 years.
Yeah, it is still I think, and you mentioned this with other types of cancer on your podcast, like ovarian cancer, I think seems similar to pancreatic cancer in that it's not like a breast cancer where you can feel a lump, or testicular cancer, you can see something different, or like prostate cancer.
Or a cancer that you can get screened for.
Right, you can get screened for, right? And so I think it is, yes, there are limited treatments, but also it's usually caught so late, because there's not like this visible thing, right. Or it's not, there is no real mechanism to test preemptively for pancreatic cancer. They keep trying different things, but none of them are statistically successful enough to really rely on. So, but mine was, the oncologist, or as I came to affectionately call him, the chemologist, was, he thought maybe 6 months, at that point, maybe 9, but 6 months was probably more. My general physician, though, was convinced that he could quarterback a scenario, an integrative medicine scenario that might give me a chance. And so I'm here today, rolling up on 7 years in August, and I'm blessed to be in a very small percentage, sub 1%, that has made it this far, and I have no visible sign of disease on my scans.
Congratulations. That is fantastic.
So no matter what they
can't
tell
say you're cured, right? Because
they will never say you're in remission. There's not enough population, statistically, they don't know. So, and they know because of the genetic mutation, I'm probably producing, defective cells. I'm on a PARP inhibitor still after all this time. I finally ended up off the chemotherapy in a cancer trial at the University of Pennsylvania at the Brasser Center, where they had 2 trials going on, or 2 arms of a trial for specifically pancreatic cancer patients I have a BRCA1 mutation. And so they had two arms of a trial going on specifically for pancreatic cancer patients with a BRCA mutation. And my oldest daughter, who is now a physician herself, was the one who found that for me. After I'd decided I would not do any more chemo, I was done. It was killing me. Now things had switched. It was now killing me faster than it was killing the cancer, right? But yeah. So I'm still here.
Wow, congratulations. That is phenomenal. Yeah, we grow to love the letters NED more than anything else in the world, because they are always very hesitant to say you're cured or you're in remission, because who knows what is going on.
Yes.
Yes. So Tell me a little bit more. So I just thought that the BRCA gene was for like breast cancer or other reproductive cancers. So, and I just did like the last two episodes were with a gentleman and his mom who had male breast cancer. And I was
Hmm.
just like speaking at a conference for male breast cancer. And, we think of that before we would think of pancreatic cancer. But is BRCA like all cancers or many cancers, or is it just specific ones?
You know, I was kind of I was kind of surprised that there were enough people that they had a trial going on, trying
Right?
to, and it was really on, it was what they were, the trials were existing approved drugs for ovarian and breast cancer, where the pancreatic cancer patient had the BRCA mutation. So I think now like the estimates keep going up that I see, kind of year over year.
Mhm.
Like the survival rates have gotten better for like the 3 and 5 year numbers for pancreatic cancer patients. I think when I started, it was like something like 1% made it 5 years, 3% made it 3 years. And I think now it's 10% of patients will make it at least 3 years. So those rates have gotten better. Specific to the BRCA mutation, I think it's something they just started realizing maybe a few years ago. The numbers I've seen are that it's possible that as much as 30%, as much as 30% of pancreatic cancer patients may have a BRCA mutation. So I guess like with all these mutations, it's not a guarantee, but certainly a weak link in the body system. It gives the cancer an opportunity. So I guess there are more pancreatic cancer patients that should be screened for not only other genetic mutations, but for BRCA mutations as well.
Now, and I know you said, I don't remember, I apologize if it was in your book or your website, that you initially did not want to do genetic testing. And
Yeah.
and then you ended up doing it. So can you kind of, because I'm actually getting ready to have genetic testing done in a couple of months myself. But can you kind of tell us that process? Like why didn't you? And then what ended up changing your mind?
Fear caused me not to do it,
Okay.
straight up. So I knew that I didn't know why my mother had and her sisters had died, but they did. It seemed to me it was probably inherited. My mother's mother had died from breast cancer, so it just. And at the time, when my physician said, and he told me this like 18 months before I was diagnosed, we had this conversation.
Okay.
And he said, Andy, I really think we should get you genetic tested. Like, you got a family history. I'm almost positive it has to do with a BRCA mutation. We really should get you tested just to confirm it so we have the information. And I said, Travis, what the hell are we going to do with that information if we have it? We're not going to do anything with it. And you know what's going to happen? I'm just going to sit around and worry about it. Okay. And I'm already worried about it. I don't want this information. I don't need this. This is kind of a recurring theme for me, which is why, like, core belief number one is no one outruns the universe, so you might as well just face up to it. Like, don't let fear stop you because it will eventually. And 18 months later, he did have one moment in that, kind of crisis stage where he did kind of smile and say, I told you. And I was like, okay, let's not cover that again. I got it. You told me. I didn't do it. Um, so yeah, I tell you, it's one of the reasons why, when anyone I speak to, they say, I've just been diagnosed. First thing is don't just trust the uh, assays that they do or the limited piece when they take the limited testing they do when they take a biopsy. Make sure they get enough biopsy that you can start doing molecular testing on it, that you get genetic, full genome testing. There's so many targeted therapies now. You really need to understand not just what the cancer is, but what mutations it's acquired. Has it moved to a distant organ? If it has moved to a distant organ, there's all these variables that you need to know. I would. They are things that I would do differently if I had it to do over again, right? Not looking backwards like, oh, I wish I, but it's like, okay, what would I do if I was starting over again? And one of them is I would make sure that in my case, the GI doctor who did the biopsy, that he got enough of a sample, more than he thought he would ever use, so that that would be retained, so that when I found out later molecular testing was available. But there wasn't enough sample to do the molecular testing, because they just took the minimal amount, and they didn't know at that time if you're going to take it from, in my case, the pancreas, and it has spread, in my case, to the liver. Take a biopsy from the liver, because you need to know if it has mutated when it moved to the distant organ. And so if it had, the distant organ might have a mutation that is treatable, even if the original organ cancer doesn't have a mutation that's treatable. So I think all that information is, it's like 3 stages. One, I would have done it sooner. And if you don't have it done, I highly recommend it. And I mean, the full genome, the full kind of dig in on the cancer possibilities, variants. And then I would also make sure that if I had to do over again, I would make sure that they took enough sample and biopsy. And by enough, I mean way more than they thought they would ever use. So that as new things come along, I would have those biopsy samples there to test as new treatments came on board, right? And things change and you don't know. But afterwards, it was, I wanted, probably 6 or 8 months into the chemotherapy, I wanted to go back and have a biopsy taken from the liver. Just to, because it was like, hey, I may not be able to stay on chemo. I need to find a targeted therapy. If one ever comes around, at that time, there wasn't really a targeted therapy for this. But by the time they got to the liver, thankfully, the cancer had been diminished enough by the chemotherapy in the liver that they couldn't accurately target a tumor to get the sample. So I didn't get it done. If I had to do it over again, those are the 2 things I do: full genome sequencing, to spot any variants that could be targeted, and then I would make sure that I got enough of a sample so that I could have that biopsy sample in storage, so that as new mechanisms and therapies came along, we could retest and see what might work.
I am just like in awe of how far medicine has come with targeted therapies for things that didn't exist 20 years ago. I'm a chiropractor by trade, so my whole training has been, thank you. My whole training has been to be skeptical, critical of allopathic medicine and go the more natural route. So I've always kind of stayed away from all of that. But just the more I'm learning, doing this podcast and in my own research and talking to people, it's just incredible the, adding life, or, letting people to live longer and live a better quality of life because of these targeted therapies that they are discovering and coming out with. It's just absolutely incredible.
I just heard, completely unaware of this, my general physician's wife has had her own struggle now with breast cancer, and it went away, and now it's back, and it's made some odd mutations. And so one of the things they just started with her is they now have a chemo that is targeted to the cancer cells. Mm-hmm. So it is less likely to be overly toxic to healthy cells. And so it's not like when I did chemo, they would just load you up with, like glucose to, try to uptake, the mutated cells wanted the glucose for reproduction. And so they would kind of tie that together. So the chemo would kind of go in with the glucose, right? But it also went into healthy cells. But now I didn't know this. Maybe it's common knowledge, but I didn't know that they had a chemotherapy that was kind of focused on not just its intent, but how it is uptaken by the cells. It's targeted to have a higher rate of uptake by the cancer cells than normal cells, in an effort to lower the side effects of your normal cells uptaking the poison. I just think that's crazy. Like, I
believe, it's wild. And I'm not sure, it might be something new, but there is, when you're diagnosed with breast cancer, you've got the hormone
Yes.
positive, and then there's a thing called HER2. And
Yes.
if you're HER2 positive, there is a targeted therapy called Herceptin that is supposed to just attack the HER2 piece, which is, in the cancer cells. So it's to just kill the cancer cells. And the method of getting it in is with the chemo drugs. So I'm
Yeah.
not like, yes, the Herceptin has done amazing things, because 20 years ago, if you were diagnosed with a HER2 positive cancer, like, you were 80% chance you weren't going to make it. And now, with Herceptin, that's drastically reduced, but it's still, the method of transmission is through
Yeah.
the other chemo drugs. Because
Yeah.
I looked into it, because I am HER2 positive, and I looked into it and I asked if I could just get the Herceptin without the chemo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they said
Yeah.
no. And I said, well, then I don't know if I want to do this or not. But,
Yeah. I don't
um,
know.
and it may be
I should
something
have
new
looked
that's
into
come out in
that.
the last 2 years
Yeah.
since I was diagnosed, but
I should have looked into it so I could know for certain. But
that's okay.
they started giving it to her when she was triple negative,
Okay.
and so I
So that might be
think it
something
is a
very
new
different.
one. But then hers has had like this weird mutation where it's gone. It was estrogen and progesterone positive, and then they got another sample and it was triple negative, and now it's like reverted back to progesterone positive. And so I don't know how that
Okay.
works, but it's like, the doctor's like, haven't seen that before. Um,
Interesting.
but I think back to the point is that there are a lot of therapies that have come out. My take on this is, though, so if you look to the website, you probably know I have this little thing where I believe we were lied to in like horror stories and fairy tales, that werewolves are not actually killed by a single silver bullet. And so you have to have a lot of things to attack. And so my approach was, what I could control, or what I could have influence over. I shouldn't say control. What I could have influence over was I could do things to weaken the cancer cells so that standard of care could better do its job. That was kind of the way I looked at the problem. Weaken it, so do both. And I'm a big believer in a combination of both Eastern and Western medicine.
Mhm.
Like I said, I'm still on a PARP inhibitor, but I also take probably 42 or so supplements, vitamins, minerals, so supplements, on-label and off-label medications every day.
Yeah,
Every
I
day, I
saw that
think I
whole
take
list on
about,
your website. I'm like,
yeah,
wow, that's
yeah,
a lot.
yeah. It's a lot, right? And I still do the guided imagery, and I still do acupuncture. I still do Reiki. I just started doing a thing. I don't know if you've heard of a book called The Emotion Code.
Hmm.
It was actually, yeah. And so I started kind of, doing those things, because I think all those things kind of can contribute both to how your body works pre-cancer and how you can respond post-cancer, diagnosis. And so that was my approach: combine everything that I could get my hands on. And my physician was, I kind of had an integrative medicine approach, and he reinforced that. And so that's what I did. I did the chemotherapy and everything else that I could find, because I wanted to give the chemo and then later the immunotherapy and then the PARP inhibitor the best opportunity to do what they had, learned through their trials and experience and use the medication. I wanted to give that the best opportunity for success. And I felt like the one thing I could do was put as much around that to strengthen, give me the energy to persist and to weaken the cancer cells at the same time. So when you look at that list of supplements, I don't recommend that. I'm not a physician. I'm not. It's just kind of like,
That's just what you do.
this is what I do, and this is, pardon me, the reason behind it.
Well, and like I've discovered that so many people who actually are proactive during chemotherapy, like before, after, whether it's with eating or fasting or supplements or, essential oils or exercise or whatever, that anything that you can do naturally that's not going to interfere with the chemo drugs to help make it a better experience, let the chemo do its work without killing you too.
Yeah.
Always,
Yeah.
almost always leads to, if not better outcomes, at least better quality of life during the process, because otherwise you're just going to be in bed for days after every chemo treatment. And, that's not really the best way to live. Not
No,
saying
I
that, that it's right or wrong, good or bad. That's just, that's kind of been shown to have better outcomes, or at least better quality of life when you're doing other things to help support your body.
Well, I mean, look, I could not agree with you more, right? I mean, like I said, I would have the pump removed, and I would go straight to acupuncture. I would walk in gray, leaning up against the wall to walk into the treatment room, and a wonderful man who's well, it's a long story, but he started the practice where my general physician's at now, but he's always been in Eastern medicine, and so now he's an acupuncturist in his 70s. But he would help me get to the table. They would do the acupuncture, and I would get up and walk out under my own power, and I would have my color back. I would go do guided imagery, specifically to, because I believe there's a lot of things that our minds have the capability of enabling, like
Oh yeah.
sending the right
Good or
proteins,
bad.
the right, good or bad, good, absolutely. But on the good side, to help kind of the healing and the detoxification and all of that from chemo. I don't think I could have gotten through chemo. I'm confident I could not have gotten through that process. I ended up doing 16 rounds of FOLFIRINOX without acupuncture, guided imagery. I saw a chiropractor weekly. I ended up adding Reiki to that. And a lot of it was just to around the energy, just to kind of make sure that the energy was flowing through and that I could do things to help my body just detox from the chemo. And, so to me, those things are not, pardon me, I apologize. To me, those things are not, in my world, they're not optional,
Yeah.
because one silver bullet doesn't kill a werewolf. You have to, weaken that beast if you're going to confront it. That's my experience.
And just an integrative approach, I think, is probably the most succinct way of saying it. Just use everything in your arsenal to,
Absolutely.
to have the best outcomes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I want to move on to your book. I'm in the process of reading your book right now, and I love all of the core beliefs that you incorporate into the book. So how did your book come about?
The book came about because of my general physician, who kind of knew a good bit about my family history, and knew about my personal history, thought that I should. At that point, I had survived like 3 years, and he said, "Hey, you, you know," he has this belief, and I hope that this helps other people because I think it is. It was certainly helpful to me. He said, "Andy, there may only be a 3% chance population wide that you make it to 5 years. There may only be, or 1%, there may only be a 3% chance you make it to 3 years. But for every individual, the percentages are 50-50.
Yeah.
Every individual either makes it or doesn't make it. So don't look at the whole. We're going to do what we can to get you over the 50-50 mark." And I
I
think
love
that's
that.
that's a great way to look at it, right? Like when you go in, because people will say all kind of things to you and they'll say, well, that's a terrible diagnosis, prognosis, 4 months. And really, you got a 50-50 shot individually to make it. So I hung on to the 50-50. So he encouraged me to write it down. And I said, I'm not a writer. That's not my thing. And then a few other people and some people in my family encouraged me. And I was like, I'm not doing that. And by last year, last spring, I think I had physically just kind of reached, I worked all the way through. When I went through the chemotherapy, when I went through the immunotherapy and it started attacking my intestines, I I worked through that. As you know, when I say worked certainly as much as I possibly could through that. The company I worked for was wonderful about, helping me be able to continue work, because I wanted to, I needed something to,
Yeah.
I just couldn't sit around and look in the mirror and see what it had done to me. Like I was not quite the same human I was before. But being on the PARP inhibitor, there's certainly a risk of fatigue, with the PARP inhibitor. And so last spring, I gotten to the point where I decided to take a leave of absence from work, just take 90 days and focus on my mental health and my physical health, and just try to see if I could get myself back in the game. And toward the end of that experience, I got super bored. I was like, it's like the first 30 days, you don't really know what to do, and you're wondering why you took the time off, because, it's like, what am I going to do now? And then 30 days after that, I just passed out and went to sleep. It's like I was so exhausted from the previous 6 years, I just kind of went to sleep. When I got back to feeling like, it's okay, maybe that's what I needed, was just, to kind of recover. I still had a few weeks left. I'd set 90 days as my target, and I had a few weeks left. I didn't know what to do. So I just started, I had my list of 15, what I call core beliefs, but these principles that I have relied on and rely on to continue. And so I had those, and I just started kind of writing. And I ended up with, down the stream, I ended up, getting an editor who thought it was apparent that I wasn't a writer. I appreciated her honesty.
That's why we love editors.
It's like, well, I like that. I like a good, honest relationship. I like transparency, and she was extremely transparent, but she was, I thought she did a nice job. And, and then you end up, like, at some point you kind of get so far into it that you're like, well, I guess I should do something with it. Like I've gone this far. So then you get, you go on Fiverr and you find somebody who does book covers, and you find somebody who does formatting, and next thing you know, it's sitting on Amazon. So it was really just kind of, I wrote it because honestly, I had the information and I got bored. And when I got bored, I didn't have the resistance to telling people I didn't want to write it. And so I did.
I love that. That's fantastic. And just from your bio, all the things that you have gone through in your life, they would bring down the strongest of humans. And I just have to hand it to you with your resilience and your perseverance, and, going through all of this. And, what's going on in your life today? Like, I'm assuming you're back at work, and, how are you feeling physically, mentally, emotionally?
I am back at work. I went back last summer after the 90 days. I feel like I have a much better grip now on what to do during the day. And I spent a lot of that 90 days actually in therapy, really focused on dealing with some of these things I'd gone through. After my son's passing, we went to a grief counselor and started work there. Then I heard about this technique, EMDR. And so I started that. And, I kind of got to the point with that, sometimes just talk therapy isn't really, at some point you're making progress and then you're just talking, and it's like, well, I need to.
I'm paying somebody $150 to, shoot the shit with, right?
Yeah, right. Well, right. Yeah. And sometimes it's not good to just rehash things. Like you get to a point where it's like, okay, we did all that. She wanted to do more MDR. I was resistant to it at that point. I'm like, okay, my long list, like I said, my 2-page list, I'm good. Let's kind of take a break from that. She's a wonderful woman. She taught me a tremendous amount. I would not trade the time that I spent with her and my family spent with her, and really the hard work she did to help us do the hard work to, be on a path to survive and recover from some of this. But I ended up taking some of that time I wanted to do hypnotherapy, right? And kind of dig in and see if there were some things in the mindset that I could work on and change. And I thought that was really helpful. I went back to work, and I've got I think a better view of how to manage my day to day life than I did before. But you still end up with the cancer never like it is always, my wife says we live in a threesome relationship, right? There's me,
I have
her,
it
and the
like
cancer.
it's right here all the time.
Yeah,
Right above my
it's
head.
there. Every ache, any pain. Oh my God, what's that? Is that
Yep.
just, it's like, well, you ate really spicy Mexican. I don't think it's pancreatic cancer, and you just got scanned. I have to talk myself through it. Like, okay, you just got scanned 3 weeks ago. Nothing was there. You had your blood work done. It's probably the Tabasco. Okay, that's what it is, right?
Or I just
but
have
it's
a
just
headache. I don't have, it hasn't metastasized to my brain. Yeah.
right. I literally have thought that same thought, 100 times. Now, I did in January this year. I did actually have some tongue cancer. They don't know where it came from. It wasn't HPV related, so I had to go in and have that removed. And it was just another reminder that I'm I am most likely never going to get away from it being with us, and it being a part, and it affects my children because then they worry. My daughter's a doctor. I basically get the eye scan every time I see her, right? Like she scans me. She's like, "What's that?" 50 years I've had that. Okay, like whatever it is. Like I've got this like mole or mark on my leg, and she's like, "What is just this past week? What is that?" I'm like, "You just never paid
Is she a
attention to it." Okay,
dermatologist?
like no,
Oh,
she because I think of what I've been through, and her mentors were my physicians, right? They've mentored her through medical school. She made the choice to not go into a specialty and to be a family practitioner. Her goal is to have an integrative medicine clinic, a practice, independent integrative medicine practice where she can bring together all these things that she's seen, and kind of take an integrative approach to it.
I love that.
So right now she's doing some side work for a chiropractic office, and she's done some other work, and but yeah, so she's a general physician. She thinks that's where things really start, but and for me it was my general physician who quarterbacked everything. If I had left it up to the oncologist to manage my process, I think I'd probably be dead right now. There was just a lot of things they didn't know, which goes to the core belief of always have an insatiable curiosity. I think you can always tell the difference. I mean, I split every profession into two categories. Like for medicine, you have physicians and you have doctors. In law, you have lawyers and you have counselors, you know. Um, and I think every profession just kind of has that. I think there's oncologists and then there's chemologists and radiologists, right? Like they're not studiers of the thing that they specialize in. They are just practitioners of what is known. And I think that's I think that can have a negative impact and a negative outcome sooner, can draw to close, one's life sooner than if you have someone who's insatiably curious. My
Mhm.
doctors at UPenn are insatiably curious. My physician's insatiably curious. So I'm blessed to have them. So I'm doing okay. I still have the side effects from the chemo. I still have the neuropathy. My hands get super cold. My feet get super cold. I can't walk a lot. I gave in and got a little handicap thing I could put on. So when I go someplace where I have to walk a lot, I feel bad about that. But, on the way back to the car, it's a struggle to walk sometimes.
Okay. So don't feel
It's
bad about
difficult.
that.
But, you hate to kind of mentally, I hate to hang it up there because it too is a reminder
Gotcha.
of, where you're at. But all in all, look, I'm doing great, right? I'm doing great. So I will trade off the neuropathy and, other things for the opportunity to be here.
That's fantastic. All right, Gandhi. So where can people find you if people want to reach out to you, if they want more information or just connect with you? What's the best way for people to be able to get a hold of you?
Probably at my website. You can message me there, askandycampbell.com.
Okay.
And then, I'm not a huge social media person, but, if you or on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn and you can find me there.
Okay, awesome. And then your book is called Overcoming Life's Toughest Setbacks. And I have the Kindle version, but you can get it on Amazon. And I will put the link to that in our show notes, as well as your website to find out more information. And then I always ask my guests, the last question is, what advice would you, one piece of advice that you would give to someone who is just starting on this journey or is in the midst of overwhelm of a diagnosis? What is one piece of advice that you would give them at this stage in the game?
It is, do not be overwhelmed by the process. Do not think past today. What do you need to do today? You need to get the testing done. You need to get the genetic testing done. You don't worry about yet will I be here in 5 years? Will I be here in 3 years? Will I be here in 2 years? Stay focused on today. Get your mindset facing forward, and take the time you need to control or be actively involved in your treatment plan. You need to take some ownership there to at least oversee and have input into it. Don't trust what everyone tells you, and take an integrative approach. So and to me, that's kind of a list that you do on the first day. It's like, okay, what are my options? What can I do? And I think that's where I would tell people to start. It is overwhelming, but you don't have to kind of wander through it and just accept. You don't have to accept the 5%, 3%, 30%, whatever general population statistics. Your statistic is 50-50. Okay. So you either make it or you don't. You got an equal, at worst, you've got an equal opportunity. And so I would say, take a deep breath. Don't be overwhelmed by it, or at least be overwhelmed for a shorter period of time. Come out of it, realize you have options, start to put a plan together, execute on the plan.
Perfect. I love that. Perfect way to wrap this up with a bow. So thank you so much for your time today, Andy. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us. And I wish you continued NED and, an entire lifetime of beating that 1% odds. Actually, you're even less than 1% because you're 7 years out now. So congratulations.
And I encourage everyone to believe that the same outcome is possible for you. So don't quit. Do not give up.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Right. Bye-bye.